Hello everyone and welcome to my first top 5 video. Today we are going to discuss the top 5 hardest scenarios in the base game of Rollercoaster Tycoon 2, so the expansions don't count. Before we start, I would like to announce that I have a Twitter now. I will use it to share interesting things that aren't fit for a video and keep you up to date on things that I'm working on. I do also talk about speed skating a fair bit on Twitter, sometimes in Dutch, so do keep that in mind if you decide to follow me. My Twitter handle is @marcelvos11. I will link it in the description. 6 months ago I asked you guys which scenario you thought was the hardest, and I have taken those votes into account for this list, along with the general opinion of the public and my own experiences. This is of course just my opinion, and the list will change for you depending on which skills you have and your personal experience with every scenario. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with my list and if I have forgotten any scenario. A top 5 hardest scenario list is a bit useless if I don't also explain how to beat those scenarios. This video would get quite long if I included all of that, so instead I will be releasing a video for every scenario over the next 5 days. Tomorrow the video about the number 5 on this list will be released, and on Saturday I will release the video that explains how to beat the hardest scenario. Without any further ado, let's get started with the list. At number 5 we have Fungus Woods. The goal of this scenario is to get at least 2500 guests and a park rating of at least 600 at the end of year 4. This is in itself a fairly high number of guests. Building a park that can hold 2500 guests is quite difficult. You need to make sure that guests don't get lost, that the paths stay clean enough, that your rides don't crash, and most importantly, that you're not going bankrupt. Aside from this, there are 2 extra factors that make this park difficult. The first one is a poor selection of rides. Following the theme of this scenario, you only have wooden rides available. Because of this, you're missing out on a lot of strong coaster types, like the looping and the junior coaster. The coasters that you do have aren't necessarily bad, but most people don't have a lot of experience with them, other than the wooden coaster, so it can be difficult to figure out how they function well. You also don't have access to any thrill rides, so there's no go-kart, swinging ship or motion simulator to make some easy money. The second compromising factor is that the map is filled with trees. Usually, pre-built scenery in a scenario is useful, as you can remove it and get money from it. But trees actually cost money to remove, so this makes everything a little more expensive. In the end, this scenario is quite difficult, but it got by far the least amount of votes on the poll, which is why it is only at number 5 on this list. At number 4 we have Gravity Gardens. The goal of this scenario is to get the park value of 500,000 and to repay your loan. The loan you start with is 10,000 euros, which isn't that high, so that is not why the scenario is so difficult. The reason is the park value requirement. By far the largest part of your park value comes from the stats of your rides. Over time, the park value that each ride gives goes down quite drastically, so it is not uncommon that by the time you can afford your next ride, the park value has dropped by quite a bit already. The reason that it can take so long to afford a new ride is that this park, like all the others on this list, is pay for entry instead of pay for rides. Once you have a relatively large park and you're not building a lot of new rides anymore, your influx of guests is likely to go down. This isn't a problem in a pay for rides park, but in a pay for entry park almost your entire income is gone when this happens. This starts a vicious circle. You get fewer guests because you cannot afford new rides, which results in even less money, meaning it takes even longer before you can afford the next ride. When this happens, it can take forever to get out of it and get to the goal, if you even manage to get out of it at all. The reason that this scenario isn't higher on the list is that once you figure out how to beat it, it's really easy and quick, and there's also no fail condition. No matter how long you take and how much you screw up, you cannot fail this scenario. Halfway through the list, at number 3, is Amity Airfield. This is probably the most infamous scenario in the entire game. The goal is to get at least 3000 guests and a park rating of at least 600 at the end of year 4. The problems with the ride selection and the trees that Fungus Woods has aren't present here, but you do need 500 more guests, which is a lot more than it seems. Managing a park that can hold over 3000 guests is very difficult, and it gets exponentially more difficult the more guests you add. The management aspect is basically the same as Fungus Woods, but more difficult in every aspect. Even though the ride selection is a little better than that of Fungus Woods, you are still missing a lot of common and easy coaster types, so it's still not fantastic. You do have access to a couple of good thrill rides, which can help a lot. Money is a bit less of an issue than in Fungus Woods, as you can delete the huge area of path that you start with, and there are not a lot of trees in the way. However, you do still have the issue of the park being pay for entry, which can lead to severe financial problems. So far, this park might not seem that much worse or even easier than Fungus Woods. The main reason that its place is higher is its placement in the scenario list of RCT2. RCT1 had a nice difficulty curve, but RCT2 doesn't. Not only are the scenarios often in the wrong category, but they're also ordered by alphabetical order within a category, instead of by difficulty. Amity Airfield is clearly an expert scenario, but for some reason it is in the challenging category. It is also the first scenario in alphabetical order in the challenging category, which means that it comes directly after the 3 beginner scenarios, and without any experience, Amity Airfield is absolutely brutal. At number 2 on the list we have Extreme Heights. The goal of this scenario is to get at least 4500 guests in your park and never let the park rating go below 700. This is the highest guest goal in the game, and you definitely notice that. Imagine the management problems of Amity Airfield, but twice as bad. Not only do you need a much larger park, but if you ever let your rating go below 700 for more than 4 weeks in a row, your park gets permanently closed and you fail the scenario. One bad crash at an unfortunate timing can finish your playthrough forever. This is the one scenario on the list where guests don't pay for the entry, which is because there's no money at all. You have unlimited funds, which is very useful in this park because of the mountainous terrain. Building in the mountains is expensive, and leveling the mountains is even more expensive, so it's nice that you don't have to worry about that. However, this also has a flip side. In scenarios with no money you cannot advertise, which means that you need to build enough rides to attract 4500 guests naturally, which will take a very long time. This means that there is more time for something like lost guests, overcrowding, or a deadly crash to ruin your playthrough. The last thing that makes this scenario difficult is that all guests prefer more intense rides. This means that they only want to ride rides with an intensity rating of 9 or higher, with the limit being a bit lower if the guests are very happy. Building coasters that have between 9 and 10 intensity can be quite tricky, so you're likely to spend a long time designing your rides, making the scenario take even longer. The only reason that this scenario isn't at number 1 is that it doesn't have a time limit. As long as you keep your rating above 700, you can take as long as you want, and if the rating does drop below 700, you have unlimited funds to fix it before the deadline. And now we have arrived at number 1 on the list, which is the most difficult scenario in the entire game. Rainbow Summit. The goal of this scenario is to get at least 2500 guests and a park rating of at least 600 at the end of year 4, which is the same as Fungus Woods. Despite this, Rainbow Summit is a lot harder. Aside from the aforementioned management problems with a large park, you also have very little flat ground to build on. You either need to expand to the water or go up the hills, which are both expensive. To make building your park even harder, you can't build above the tree height. So especially on the water you can barely build anything that's taller than a merry-go-round. You can raise the land, but that's very expensive. Building underground is also an option, but once again that's also more expensive than building on flat ground. There are also plenty of trees in the park, which also adds some extra cost. All this, in combination with the pay-for-entry nature of the park, can easily lead to heavy financial problems. And as we have discussed before, this can easily ruin your park. This is made even worse by the fact that advertising is forbidden in this scenario. This means that you need to build enough rides to attract 2500 guests naturally, which costs a lot of money. You also cannot advertise in the last couple of months to get those last couple of hundred guests if you're a bit short. You do start out with some rides, and while the wooden coaster is quite useful, the chairlift is a trap. It seems like a nice ride, so most people will not remove it. However, guests can easily get lost on a path at the top of the mountain if you don't build a connection to the lower part of the park. All in all, Rainbow Summit has the perfect combination of factors to be considered the most difficult scenario in RCT2, and it is rightfully the last scenario in the scenario list. That was my top 5 hardest scenarios in RCT2. If we look at the common elements of the goals, it seems that a high guest goal and a pay-for-entry park both make for a difficult scenario. Look forward to the tutorials on how to beat all those scenarios in the next 5 days. Let me know in the comments what other top 5 videos you would like me to do. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.